Good evening and welcome to the Richmond Local History Society. I'm sorry we can't have our party tonight, but we do have the next best thing, a talk about Christmas. And who better to give it than George Goodwin, who has written a book about Christmas traditions, which is published by the British Library. George, who lives in Kew, has written books on Benjamin Franklin in London, on the War of the Roses, and on the rivalry between James IV of Scotland and our own King Henry VIII. He is a fellow of the Royal Historical Society and of the Royal Society of Arts. Tonight, he will be sharing his enthusiasm for a very special time of year, exploring the gradual creation of our modern Christmas traditions. Please give a very warm welcome to George Goodwin.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Robert. And I was looking forward to meeting you all personally. And of course, to the party, of course, business meeting that was due to follow afterwards. However, this is the next best and probably the wisest thing. And may I give you all a warm hello, either to those seeing me now, I hope, or who are viewing the recording. Now, when Robert signed me up, I put forward the suggested title of Christmas Traditions with reference to Richmond and Kew, because I was not quite sure what I would find in the local studies library. Now, thanks to archivist Janine Stanford and her able assistants Lara Bond and Patricia Maloney, I've had great fun as a busman's holiday from my day job of writing 2 books on George Washington. Now, Patricia in particular pulled out all kinds of interesting things for me. Now, my talk is essentially in 3 parts, though they do intermingle. Part 1 is on the life and times of Father Christmas and Santa Claus. Part 2 will address the question, when did the commercial Christmas come to Richmond? And part 3 will switch to Kew and use St Anne's, Kew Green, to illustrate some religious traditions, particularly those around singing and children. But first, an introduction considering the date of the 25th of December and its significance for someone with the initials JC, that JC being one Julius Caesar, who told his astronomers in 45 BC to plot the shortest day of the year. And they came up with the 25th of December, which was accurate at the time. For the Romans, the short days of winter with the harvest gathered was a good time for a party. And that was also true of the heathen Saxons. So it seemed logical that when the papacy in the 4th century AD decided to agree the date for Jesus's birth, they would start converting the heathens by co-opting their festival dates. Actually, it didn't work out quite like that, because the key event for the early Christians was the Annunciation at the time of the spring equinox on the 25th of March, with the 25th of December being just its result, exactly 9 months later. It was not until Pope Gregory the Great and St. Augustine agreed in 597 AD that the best way to convert the heathen of Kent was to start co-opting those heathen festivals. So to co-opt the time of the winter feast, the church started to emphasize Christ's birthday. But now for part 1, and moving closer to home, not yet to Richmond, but to Crystal Palace via 2 Morning Chronicle adverts for their big Christmas event. And these I've actually deliberately chosen to show how far Father Christmas changed between 1858 and 1870. Now I will give you the key bits. On the left, we read of a monster plum pudding in honor of Old Father Christmas, and of mummeries and processions in the great hall of mince pie, summoned to attend Old Father Christmas and his court. On the right is headed with a palace pantomime at Crystal Palace, But Father Christmas down here has a cave. Can't quite see it, but he has a cave. And on the same line, there is a great fancy fair and bazaar here for the purchase of gifts, Christmas and New Year's gifts. Now, it's quite a swift transformation. So what of old Christmas with his children here and his drink? Well, for that we have no less a source than Father Christmas himself. Through his creation, though his creation owed itself to a joking satire. This 19th century Robert Seymour illustration represents the first real personification of Christmas, which occurred in a 1616 seasonal court masque by Ben Jonson, here he is, and Inigo Jones. And in this, he was successively called Christmas, Old Christmas, Christmas of London, Captain Christmas, and even Gregory Christmas, most likely a reference to Pope Gregory the Great. Christmas, his masque, was written and produced for James I and VI here in the Royal Collection's coronation portrait by Paul van Sommer. King James, as the young James VI of Scotland, had suffered some appallingly miserable childhood Christmases at the hands of his Presbyterian Scots guardians, men who saw Christmas as a time for praying and definitely not playing. After James came to England, he wanted fun at Christmas with lots of court masks in deliberate defiance of his childhood upbringing. In fact, he said, "I want one on Christmas Day." And they said, but Your Majesty, we don't have one on Christmas Day. But he then said, well, he sort of consulted his divine right of kings, and they had one on Christmas Day, as you can imagine. Now, Ben Jonson and Inigo Jones knew their master well. And in Christmas, his masque, not only did they portray Captain Christmas as under threat, but gave him his 10 children. And the children had names such as Carol, well, that's fair enough, but also they had names such as Mince Pie and New Year's Gift. In fact, Jonson and Jones satirized everything the Puritans hated about Christmas festivities, which the latter regarded as a time of drunkenness and licentiousness, of the devil's work for idle hands. The Puritans' idea of the best Christmas would be one of absolutely no festivity at all. And in the interregnum, the British Puritans got their way. First of all, during the early Civil War, the Presbyterians in Parliament signed the Solemn League and Covenant with their Scottish allies, and that introduced restrictions on festive celebration. These were restrictions that Cromwell and his major generals kept in place because they feared that groups of people in celebration could quickly turn to riot and rebellion. In a pamphlet of protest, Christmas, here we see him in the middle, is once again personified in his robes. And in the center of this complaint, it's all about the excise duty and lack of strong beer. "Oh, sir, I bring good cheer." But he wants his mighty Christmas ale. But it'd be a long way before the non-present bringing Captain Christmas became the red-suited flying Father Christmas of this illustration towards the end of the 19th century. For the beginnings of this transformation, we need to figuratively fly across the Atlantic and look to the author Washington Irving, because in 1809, Irving created a flying Santa Claus, or rather a flying Sinterklaas, the Dutch name for St. Nicholas. Here we are, St. Nicholas of Myra on the left, who was the ancient present bringing Catholic saint. He was he wasn't very careful with his presents, as you can see him dropping them down the chimney. But never mind. Once again, this creation of Irving's, it started as a satirical joke, with Irving mocking fellow New Yorkers who were rather imaginative in their creation of domestic and domesticated traditions for their fast expanding and increasingly lawless city. In Irving's book-length satire entitled Deirdrick Knickerbocker's History of New York, he invented lots of ludicrously false traditions of his own, including having St. Nicholas, the present-bringing saint, flying over Manhattan in, as Irving described, the self-same wagon he annually used to bring presents to children, and had St. Nicholas and Sinterklaas pointing down to the original Dutch settlers that this, on Manhattan, was where they should site their city. Now, Irving's St. Nicholas was wholly benevolent, unlike the traditional European version, who on the eve of his feast day of the 6th of December, or on the day itself, only brought presents for the good children, and as a double punishment, brought a birch for the bad. Here in this Jan Steen painting in the Rijksmuseum, things have not turned out too well for the big boy on the left, much as in the normal nature of things, to his siblings' very great amusement. As I said, Irving was an extraordinarily popular author, and his version of St. Nicholas, Sinterklaas, took root, as in an 1821 poem for children. Here the figure is now called Santa Claus, and he now delivers his presents not on St. Nicholas's Eve, but on Christmas Eve. He has a red coat, he has a reindeer, and the most appalling poem, as you will see on the next slide. However, he is not quite the man in red as yet, for there is obviously a bit of character confusion here, with him going like a traffic light from red to green and then back again. But he's still got his birch here and this poem. I left a long black birchen rod, such as the dread command of God directs a parent's hand to use when virtue's path his sons refuse. But thankfully, he loses that birch in the very same year of 1821 in A Visit from St. Nicholas by this chap, Clement Clark Moore, a professor of Hebrew in New York, who incidentally also owned a sizable estate on Manhattan. Lucky him. In this poem, perhaps best known by its first line, "'Twas the night before Christmas," St. Nicholas is completely benevolent, bubbling with happiness and taking on the character we know so well. But it took a while for illustrators to catch up. On the left, in 1846, we have Santa Claus quadrilles, with a Knickerbocker reference here, down here to Washington Irving. On the right, in 1848, the first time that Moore's poem was published in an illustrated version, we have this rather unsuitable figure, as we do below in 1858. I'm not quite sure how far this Santa Claus is going to get with a turkey-pulled sleigh, and I was rather amused by his likeness to Tommy Cooper. But it took yet another New Yorker, the political cartoonist Thomas Nast, finally to get to grips with Santa. Well, certainly in shape, here he is on the right of the picture, and he's beginning to look to be a more familiar figure. Though, as I show here, the first Nast illustration of him during Christmas time 1862 is, though, distinctly unusual. Here is Santa Claus being shown giving presents to Union troops. And I can tell you, it worked out so successfully that the next year, the Confederates came up with their own Santa as a kind of counter. From that beginning, and over the next 18 years, Nast forged the figure we know so well. Santa Claus was shown in a contemporary setting, here using here using the ultra-modern telephone. He was given a workshop and helpers, and now was making toys as well as delivering them. Nast gave Santa a home at the North Pole. And in this 1881 version, later given this full colorization, Nast is pretty much there with the final Santa Claus. Although it would be an Australian illustrator, Frank Nankerville, though also working in New York, and not the artist working for Coca-Cola, as is often claimed, who would add the final touches. I have to say, from the look of his sack, I think Santa has come to the wrong room, don't you? Though I also have to say, he does not look too upset about it. Now, Thomas Nast, publisher, wrote of Nast's Christmas drawings that his Santa Claus is old Father Christmas himself. And that was indeed the case, because from the 1870s onwards, Britain's Father Christmas began to be rebooted, with himself and the American newcomer beginning to become one and the same, though he often kept his robe, and much more importantly, he kept his name, because it says here, as you can see, Old Father Christmas on the book. And it didn't really matter whether he was in the robe or the new suit. But to treat this as some kind of hostile takeover would be wrong, as it would be truer to regard it as Santa Claus having co-opted the older figure, which I show on the left, into a new kind of Christmas, and having vitalized him into becoming the standard bearer of what would be a new child-friendly, family-orientated, and commercial Christmas. But when can we say that modern English Christmas traditions began? We can pinpoint a time 2 centuries ago, just after the end of the long, exhausting Napoleonic Wars. The spark came from someone who was not himself British, but a tremendous admirer of Britain and the British. Someone who was, you guessed it, American. And we're back to Washington Irving. And this time, he was not in favor of satire, but of frolic and of fun. Irving, inspired by his stay at English country houses, created a fictional version of a traditional English country Christmas. In this, he describes some English traditions, revived some that had died out, such as the boar's head here on the left, and he even invented some short-lived ones that had never previously existed. He described Christmas as the time when his fictional squire Bracebridge looked after his tenants, but now also as a time of fun and of presents for children. Irving may now be less well known, perhaps even just remembered for his stories Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle, but back then he was a very substantial figure. He was one of America's greatest novelists of the 19th century and a #1 bestseller on both sides of the Atlantic, with a transatlantic success only surpassed by this man, Charles Dickens. Actually, we're so used to seeing the old Dickens that it's something of a shock to see this 1842 portrait of the then 29-year-old Dickens. And it was painted by Boston's Francis Alexander on Dickens's 1842-1843 American tour. Now, Dickens was a very great fan of Irving's. Indeed, he wrote to Irving saying how much he would have loved to have joined him on the night coach to Bracebridge Hall. A nicely romantic emotion, because looking at it, I mean, looking at the coach at the top, I would say it's better imagined than experienced. But in one sense, Dickens did join Irving. Dickens completely echoed Irving with his own fictional countryside-based Christmas. Christmas at Dingley Dell in the Pickwick Papers, first published in 1836. In this, Dickens also harked back to an idealized rural Christmas at the home of a benevolent country squire. But even prior to his country Christmas of the Pickwick Papers, Dickens had also, just the year before, described a more democratic urban Christmas in a sketch with the title A Christmas Dinner. It was from this point, and in the 4 decades or so after the Great Reform Act of 1832, that much of the modern British secular Christmas began to be created. The illustration shown here is again by Robert Seymour, who was to be the first illustrator of Pickwick. But actually the book illustrated here, published in the same year as Pickwick, is Harvey's The Book of Christmas, one of a succession of books giving the growing middle class a how-to book on enjoying a Christmas that was now much more family-focused than the ones of old. But the illustration does very well for the family Christmas in Dickens's A Christmas Dinner, with Dickens writing in A Christmas Dinner in bracing style. The Christmas family party that we mean is not a mere assemblage of relations got up at a week or two's notice, originating this year, having no family precedent in the last, and not likely to be repeated in the next. No, it is an annual gathering of all the accessible members of the family, young or old, rich or poor, as you can see here. Dickens amplified how to enjoy Christmas, as well as Scrooge's how not to, in his A Christmas Carol, first published in 1843. And here is a larger version of John Leech's illustration of Mr. Fezziwig's Christmas Party in the first edition of the book. And note the couple here are kissing under the mistletoe, which is not so old a tradition as people might think. There is no mention of it until very late in the 18th century. And I went into this in some detail, and I found somebody who had written 2 enormous great compendia on all the possible uses for mistletoe, and kissing under it actually wasn't in there. But back to the importance of the 1840s, because this was also when the Christmas cracker was first invented and the first commercial Christmas card was sent. As for the introduction of the Christmas tree into England, that was not through Prince Albert, as is often thought, but by George III's German consort, Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. But Albert most certainly did popularize the Christmas tree. In 1848, at the end of the year of revolutions in Europe and of Chartism and massive unrest at home, Victorian Albert invited in the media in the form of the Illustrated London News and promoted the civilized family joy of the royal Christmas. It was a popular move in aim and effect. The royal Christmas trees were described in the subsequent article. For those who could afford them, they became a must-have, as we can see in this copycat illustration for a later song sheet. Here is another illustration from Harvey's Book of Christmas. This shows the reader how to enjoy Christmas in terms of food and drink, rather not like this worse for wear man in the middle, having his collar felt by one of Sir Robert Peel's new policemen, but rather this chap here with his wife looking forward to enjoying a side of beef. Beef, this was the traditional celebration food of a true Englishman. But by the time of another how-to book in 1852, with the indicative title of A Holiday Book for Christmas and the New Year, goose and turkey were growing in popularity. Now, the holiday book also showed people how to create their own traditions, and these included involving the entire family in making the Christmas pudding, somewhat chaotically, as you can see. So these were the beginnings of what can be described as the modern secular Christmas. But when can we say that it became fully established as the commercial and totally child-focused occasion starring the Father Christmas Santa Claus doppelganger? For this, we can use Richmond as a case study and my research starting point of how 3 drapers became department stores. They were Goslings and Sons, which may have become established in George Street as early as 1795. But it was certainly trading there by 1823. Now, this photograph from around 1900 shows that it was roundly in the same place as the recently demised Dickens and Jones, and actually a bit further along. I have to say, I was really illustrated by this. I'm sure one of you local historians will be able to tell me what it was. The second was Wright Brothers, which started operating across the road and further down in 1878, basically where the Tesco is now. The third, arriving in 1899, was Chemthorne, based in the block between Victoria and Church Walk, opposite Boots, and they added furnishing and jewellery to the clothes business. Now, in my quest for the modern commercial Christmas, I turned to the pages of the Richmond and Twickenham Times. I'm afraid only represented by reel-to-reel microfiche, so some of the pages are not that clear as here, and for that I apologise, but it's the best we can do. However, I hope they're clear enough for you to see that in 1905, the idea of specific Christmas presents and New Year's gifts would certainly have taken hold. But it was far better for adults than for children. Goslings, and this is for goslings, as you will see down here. Though it was great if you wanted something like bear rugs and tiger rugs, and you'll see from the strap line at the top, there's a great emphasis on the word useful. And that's also the case in these Gosling and Wright Brothers adverts for 1910 and 1912. Here we are, useful and artistic goods. And here we are, nowadays it's the custom to give useful Christmas presents, and in these goods that we specialize. Though we have to say, look, children there, they get a little mention down there in the bottom corner of the Gosling one. But there was change afoot, as we can see from all these adverts from 1911. Williamson's, the grocers, may have some of the old Christmas images. Here's the boar's head, but there are chocolates and sweets. And in the middle, there's yet another clothes shop in Richmond, part of a chain called Hope Brothers. And they're not only talking about specific presents for boys and girls, but these could be, and there could be, here we are, novel games for boys and girls. As for James Hunt, which I'm going to have to explain because we're blocking him out, their nearest shop was in Hammersmith, and though they described themselves at the bottom here as well, they did describe themselves before that they flicked up as complete house furnishers. They actually headline, and you have to believe me, with dolls, toys, and games. Though it's interesting that in the next year, Hope Brothers went back to useful, but there were now other and non-Richmond based firms advertising for Christmas in the Richmond and Twickenham Times, such as Frank Bentley of Kingston with his Christmas gifts. And here we look, we can see there's a clockwork boat, there's a clockwork motor car, and there's dolls furniture that he's featuring there. Our three chosen Draper department stores are still keeping to the adult-based theme of their advertising. But the Richmond and Twickenham Times itself shows a change in an important element of the Christmas story as it was presented in Richmond in 1912, because the Richmond and Twickenham Times had introduced Christmas competitions, including story competitions. And that year, the long story winner was Annie O. Tibbets with What Christmas Meant, with a kind of Does He Love Her tale focusing on a girl called Dorothy, who was a draper's assistant, obviously. And all ends happily with this eye-catching sentence. It is in a week of Christmas Day, and her Santa Claus, note, will bring her a wedding ring. Note that Father Christmas, not him, but Santa Claus. The interchangeability has happened. And at the time of change, there was another American import with 3 cinemas opening that year. And I have to say, I was particularly taken by the Kinema color. And this, I mean, it's rather spectacular. I mean, you think, gosh, you know, every frame colored in. And I suppose you then think, well, actually, it's exactly the same as early Walt Disney, because they actually had to draw the frames and color them in. But it's, you know, it's something that one just doesn't think that, you know, there is a way of actually making this sort of more realistic to make it sort of suit the modern world. Here again, here we see the remodeling of Father Christmas as seen in 1917. And it's in a magazine called the Springbok, which was the magazine of the South African Military Hospital. And that was inside Richmond, actually inside Richmond Park. It was just go into Richmond Gate, go along a little bit, and there it was, marked on red, in red on this illustration. Now, in that same issue of the Springbok, there was something quite novel, a Christmas advertorial around a story called A Christmas Shopping Jaunt, where a married woman called Mary, with a husband at the front, goes to the South African Military Hospital to take out her wounded young cousin. Now, they seem to go to almost every shop in Richmond. I say almost because though Wrights and Chemthornes get good coverage, there's definitely no Goslings. Perhaps Goslings refuse to contribute. But in one way, the story is amusing to us because though it starts very slowly with the cousin buying a few half-inch screws for his woodworking, Mary buys up the entire town from the Kew Road to here in Hills Rise, starting with something for her fire grate and ending up renting a house for herself, her mother and her two children. And I'm afraid with the latter hardly getting a mention in the piece, just a couple of picture books. That's all. And actually, I quite like these illustrations. This was they stopped off at the Pagoda Tea Rooms. Actually, they said, oh, it was so fashionable we couldn't get in. So they went to Rose Cottage, also in Hill Rise, and they did very well. So they gave them a nice plug. Well, I suppose, you know, for the lack of presents for children, well, there was a war on, but we're back to useful presents. Well, certainly, let's face it, useful for Mary. So after this, the initial fizzing, we can call it, of the modern commercial Christmas, just pre-war. When is Richmond's great modern and child-focused consumer Christmas really going to spark into life? Let me take you to 1926. Like Wrights and Goslings, Chemthornes had kept to their core business, as I could see from looking at their pride of place advertisements over many, many years. Except now it had changed. Their Xmas Bazaar that they were advertising, it was now completely toy focused. And at the top it says, buy British toys, and lots bricks, British soldiers, Lucy Atwell dolls, blah, 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 the whole lot. Chemthornes obviously felt they had to do something because another kind of department store was advertising in the Richmond and Twickenham Times. Stores such as Gamages. The modern, child-focused consumer Christmas is here in 1926. And I'm going to point some things out for you here. Here is on the left, we have Father Christmas with loads and loads of toys, loads and loads of toys here. And now, you know, it's a great Christmas bazaar now in full swing, and it's bigger and better than ever. Trainloads of toys. Father Christmas is here, gifts for all. And they have a catalogue, an Xmas special catalogue. And this bit, see the grand spectacle, Niagara Falls in London, thousands of gallons of real water falling every hour. Every little boy and girl will want to bring their parents, uncles and aunts, big brothers and sisters to see this wonderful sight. I had a feeling, and I have to say that I really didn't think that this consumer Christmas had taken hold until after the Second World War. This is obviously because, you know, this is a sort of, it's a new period for me. and it's here, 1926. And of course, we're now getting in this advert on the right, you don't make your Christmas puddings, you buy them. And, life is now all about saving time, as in this advert, buying rather than making. And it has a rather uncouth line, I think. Don't go to the trouble. Don't get fagged mixing and preparing your own Xmas puddings this year. Save time, trouble and money by ordering new from the hygienic bakeries in the quadrant. In that same issue of the paper, here is a familiar figure we might call Father Santa Christmas Claus, being used in advertising on the left, and he's now in the sort of requisite gear. As for his quintessential importance, along with his presence, it's demonstrated by the 1932 story piece on the right from Good Housekeeping during the 1930s recession. Here a very poor boy meets a department store Santa called Alan, and I only know the one paragraph because it accompanied an illustration I liked for my book. But I'm gonna read the paragraph for you because I liked it. I sneaked in, whispered the child, because I wanted to see you special, because you're Santa Claus and you can get a kid something what he wants, can't you? Why, yes, youngster, Alan said, trying to sound convincing. Well, I hope the manager helped him out there, but I'm sure he did. And even if the PC didn't, I'm sure it did. Anyway, but now to Kew and a quick look at some religious traditions, particularly those around singing and children. And we're going to travel via this splendid Gothic tunnel at one of Kew Gardens past Christmas lights. And we emerge at St. Anne's Kew Green, place I'm particularly fond of because that's where I got married, and we will address some carol singing. Now, I cannot seamlessly continue with the year 1926, and I haven't taken you there. That would just be too perfect. But I can take you to 1927, as I read in the December 1927 issue of the St. Anne's Parish magazine, that they were thinking of instituting something new, a carol service. And as I read in the December 1928 issue, it was a great success and was made a permanent fixture. Of course, carols date way back. I mean, the first English carol right back to the time of King John. And carol services have been going on for some time, such as this one at St. Mary Magdalene, Richmond, from 1875, with its 7 carols and the invocation to the congregation to join heartily. But surely the best carol service is 9 lessons and carols, invented by Bishop Benson of Truro in 1880. Now, he did very well. As a result, he became Archbishop of Canterbury, and all went well until we had a little bit of an unusual situation. His wife ran off with the daughter of the previous Archbishop of Canterbury, but they smoothed everything over. Anyway, its most famous version, and for me, something that marks the real beginning of Christmas, is the one from King's College, Cambridge at 3 p.m. on Christmas Eve, which, spoiler alert here, has thankfully already been recorded for this year. The first of these services at King's was in 1918, with the introductory solo being introduced the following year. As traditions evolve, some being created and others lost, this slide illustrates one of the latter, children going house to house singing carols. That's now gone, rather like a penny for the guy in the lead up to November the 5th. Children's carol singing now tends to be more organised and school focused, such as this one at St. Anne's. Now, the school carol services at St. Anne's have replaced an earlier children's service that was going particularly strongly in the 1920s, that being the Young People's Toy Service. In 1930, the service found a particular friend, and that was George V's formidable Queen Consort, Queen Mary, seen here on the right. Now, she sponsored it. Now, to ensure that all went to plan, the following notice appeared in the December 1930 issue of St. Anne's Parish Magazine. We have promised the Queen's representative that the toy service will be held on the second Sunday of December. The boys and girls of Kew are asked to bring toys at 3 p.m. During the service, they will be received, that's the toys, by the clergy and dedicated at the foot of the altar. The toys will be sent to the boys and girls who will spend Christmas time in the various London hospitals. Now, that's all very good and fair enough. It's that it was a bit of a reluctance from the children at the idea of giving away their nice toys. And this was shown by complaints from the palace. With the following appearing in the December 1931 Parish Magazine, it is not necessary to bring new toys, but young people should be encouraged to give of their best. But that did not work either, as there was further resistance and further complaints, as shown in the December 1932 magazine, where the toys were criticised as not only in bad condition, but dirty. And I'm afraid that Queen Mary's sponsorship fizzled out, though the toy service continued at least into the 1960s, and then I'm afraid it became one of those traditions that ended. The war of the toys was over. One tradition that has lasted is that of the Christmas crib and nativity play. I say one because they were both invented at the same time in 1223 by St. Francis of Assisi, with his first version being a service where he acted out the play himself around a Christmas crib. Now, this crib is the one at St. Anne's, with the photograph taken after the crib service, because here is Jesus safely installed in the crib. And here is a nativity play, actually not from around here, but from the northeast of England. I've chosen it because it shows how heartwarming these things can be. I mean, Mary looks so happy. I have to say Joseph looks a bit distracted, but I just loved the different performances by the sheep. Now, one cannot absolutely predict which traditions will thrive and which won't. Here's a newish one, for us at least. Christingle was first celebrated in the Moravian Church in Germany in 1747, but it first came to the Church of England in Lincoln Cathedral in 1968, and St. Anne's only introduced it recently. But whether it will last or not, that is one for the future. Which leads me to my penultimate slide and the opportunity to sort out all your Christmas presents in one go. I actually managed to sell 7 copies of my book to one happy gentleman at St. Anne's on that basis. And I'll sign copies with my magic white pen, which is necessary, obviously, because of the white background. And actually, you can't see, if you want to know more about it, I'm easy enough, actually, to find. It's george@georgegoodwin.com. I mean, as well as my best prose, packed full of colour illustrations from the British Library's vast collections. And I've actually shown a great number here in my talk. But anyway, as I say, if you're interested, send me an email to my easily remembered email address. And after you've all had the happiest possible Christmases, if you would like to see me again early next year, hopefully talking actually at St. Anne's, and I'll be talking about the Armageddon of the First War of the Roses, which Robert mentioned at the beginning, and it's based on my book, Fatal Colours. And here underneath is the link. But if you go to the Friends of St. Anne's website, again, there you will find it. And all I can say is thank you very much indeed.
George, thank you very much indeed. That was fascinating.
Great, I enjoyed it.
I know when we talked before, just when lockdown started, you weren't sure whether you could make the talk relevant to Richmond and Kew. And you've done it in spades. Fantastic. Well,
Oh, good, good. Well, I'm glad, as they say, I passed the audition.
are there any questions, please? If you want to unmute yourself, you can ask a question, or you could put it into chat.
We can certainly chat away. I mean, you will probably been quite surprised to have found that the modern Christmas was quite so American focused. But as I said, Santa Claus was its great standard bearer for the commercial Christmas, and it sort of took over in America. And of course, as I hope I demonstrated, it was very much tied in with the department stores. Now, I could have gone on for a much longer on my normal talk, and I could have told you all about, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which actually that started as a department store giveaway in 1939, and it was given to the copyright by the department store Montgomery's, which now, like so many others, no longer exists, to the author Robert L. May of the basic. I mean, it was a freebie for children, and Robert L. May's his brother-in-law was Gene Autry, the singing cowboy, who first put it to music in 1949. Now, a question I am actually asked quite often, so I'll ask it and answer it myself, is what is special? What about where does the rhyme, the 12 Days of Christmas come from? What is the significance of all the different things? And I can actually tell you, there isn't any, because it was actually created as a child's sort of nonsense poem in a book called Mirth Without Mischief, from if I remember rightly, from the a long time ago, from the 18th century. But there was an interesting Catholic priest who invented all kinds of reasons for these things. And actually, I have to say, I'm afraid he made it all up.
George, there's some questions have just come through.
Good.
First one from Wendy Carter. When did the elves come in? Perhaps from the USA?
Yeah. Basically, it was all about. Oh well, we've got Father Christmas. Now he needs some little helpers. So as soon as he stopped actually buying in things and started making his toys at his home in the North Pole, so Thomas Nast actually introduced his elves to help him. So again, we're talking around about 1870.
Next question is from Robert Monk, saying, do younger and younger children now believe in Father Christmas?
Oh, well, I think that's one for somebody with I can't really qualify, because my children are both grown up, so that's one for people with younger parents. I rather fear it's probably likely, don't you? Because with the number of films around, I would think that I fear that is probably the case, that the age of innocence, if you like, is over in a bit, and very young children, I would have thought, are knowing the truth, as it were. But actually, what I found with my own children, and I'm sure others will agree, is though they knew the truth of the matter, they pretended that they didn't, because they rather liked the idea of forcing me to get out a peeler and peel away at the carrot to show that Rudolph had been, and to take a chunk out of the mince pie, etc. So I think there's probably a little bit of bluff on both sides.
Jenny Tongue has said she's not sure if this is a Christmas memory or not, but you did not mention the visit of Queen Victoria, etc., through Richmond Town Centre. When did that start and finish? And Jenny says, I was Florence Nightingale.
I won't, Jenny, I won't give a politician's answer to that one. I will come straight to the point and say, well, of course, as I said, this is a busman's holiday. I am not a local historian, though I've done my best, but I'm sure that there will be a local historian among the members of the society who will be able to enlighten you. And there's a challenge.
Good answer. And Simon Target, himself a historian, has said, how did researching and writing your Christmas book compare with researching and writing your other books, e.g. the one on Benjamin Franklin?
Well, it didn't take me quite so long, is what I can say. I had an interesting experience with the editor at the British Library, who was perfectly sweet, and we got on very well on a sort of personal business, on a personal basis rather. And I was actually doing a 6-month fellowship at George Washington's Mount Vernon. So I got slightly annoyed by the 48 queries that she came up with, for which she got 49 answers. And I have to say, I don't think I changed any of them. So in the end, I think she gave up. But no, I mean, obviously the Benjamin Franklin, it took me a good 18 months to do. This one was much shorter because here I'm plugging it again. It is full of, and it's a short little book, something which can't quite fit into a stocking unless you really stretch it. But it's full of illustrations, so it was much easier and quite a lot of fun, because I was able to I got in contact with some real Christmas experts, including one who lives in Winnipeg, where he says that is somewhere where there is a 99.9% chance of there being a white Christmas. And he's actually written Santa Claus's autobiography, as well as the World Encyclopedia of Christmas. And that's actually, it's quite difficult to get hold of. I think it's out of print, but it's really worth, it's great fun. Because in that, I mean, he goes into detail of Christmas around the world, and that's fun. I mean, I have a little bit at the back of the book on various Christmases, like a Scandinavian Christmas, and some stuff, some stuff distinctly to America, some stuff in Japan. Actually, I was amazed. There is an illustration that I found of Father Christmas in his suit, completely the sort of the modern figure bringing gifts to a traditional Japanese house, and it was from 1912, so it really got there quite quickly.
George, coming back to your book, when was it actually published?
It was published, well, as you remember, Robert, we met up when in the Kew bookshop a couple of years ago, and it had just been published then. And I was due to give this talk. I was due to give it a year ago, and actually, I must tell you, Robert. I mean, after you left, Giles Brandreth arrived, and the whole place was in chaos within moments as he was sort of barking orders to his poor daughter. And the three people working in the shop all barricaded themselves behind the counter. It was extremely amusing, but I made my excuses and left, as they say. But no, it's a couple of years old, but I don't think it's dated. I think we're all right.
I was intrigued that it's published by the British Library. I didn't realize the British Library published books as well as actually storing them. Did they? Well,
yes, they do. They have a small publishing arm, and I have to say, I was very pleased with the book that they turned out. The picture researcher was absolutely brilliant, And I was particularly delighted with the cover, which actually found some 1920s/30s wrapping paper, and we use that as the color image, and I think it's absolutely terrific.
So did the British Library commission the book, or did you approach them to publish it?
I approached them. I actually said to them, because I thought, right, okay, I had a couple of titles, and I thought it would just be fun to do, and this was the one that we decided to go with, and it you know, I produced it quite quickly. I was very lucky in that as a graduate of Cambridge University, and as they have, well, certainly had then, they've got a now a new storage facility. They're very keen for MAs to take out books. So I was able to take out just about every conceivable book on Christmas because they're a copyright library. So that was a great resource.
Right. Are there any more questions, anybody? If not, I'm going to wrap up. And at this stage in the proceedings, I would normally present the speaker with a bottle of wine, which can be quite difficult when you're doing it on Zoom. But George came up with a very novel idea. He said instead of a bottle of wine, he and his wife Frances would prefer to have a free annual, a 3 years joint membership of the society. I think it's a great idea.
Very good.
Far better.
I'm just going to say welcome to George and Frances to the society. Thank you for a great idea, which we'll use as one of the options again for future speakers. And thank you for an excellent talk.
Well, I've very much enjoyed it. Thank you, Robert. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
And can I wish anybody as Merry Christmas as we can have in the present circumstances, and hoping for a happier new year.
All best.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Very good. Very enjoyable. Bye.